Good morning and welcome to the BBB Summit. I'm Drew, obviously, and to my left here is Paulette. Paulette, here in Connecticut, we have a lot of big trees. As you know, I live in the woods of Ellington. I've known you for over 30 years, and you've been at the helm of the BBB of Connecticut for 43 years. Today, the BBB of Connecticut is the second largest business organization in Connecticut, second only to the Connecticut Business and Industry Association. To me, you're like a big tree with big roots, with strong roots. As a leader, you've faced many storms in the form of economic and business cycles, dramatic changes in technology, and most recently, a brutal pandemic. To me, you could be a poster child for the theme of this year's BBB Summit, Resolve to Evolve. First of all, where did you grow up?
Well, Drew, that is a great question. I'm sure everybody always asks, where did you grow up? And, I was actually born in Rhode Island, but we moved to Connecticut when I was only 3. So if you want to know where I grew up, it was probably East Haven and North Branford through those very important years.
Sure. And what was your educational path?
Well, I started out when I was ready to go to college thinking, I think I want to be a teacher, but I soon changed my major to communications.
And where did you go to school?
I went to Southern. I guess it's a university now. When
Sure.
I first started going, it was a college, but now it's a university.
And what was your career path that led you to the BBB?
Well, I landed my first real job at the Chamber of Commerce in New Haven. And there I was able to use my communication skills to manage the retail council. The BBB office was right next door, and I was always interested in what was going on at that BBB. So when the manager moved to Boston, I applied for the position. Since the BBB was having financial difficulties at the time, I actually worked both organizations. I stayed with the Retail Council and the Better Business Bureau, putting in 12-hour days until the BBB was up and running efficiently. Then I moved over full-time to the BBB as the executive director. And within 3 years, I grew the BBB threefold and was elected to be the president.
Outstanding. In order for someone to stay on point with successfully leading an organization for 43 years, you've got to have passion, vision, and a sense of mission. What has driven you to wake up every morning enthused about leading the BBB of Connecticut?
Probably knowing I was going to take a hot shower. But for me, I have to say, it was always wondering what great opportunity was going to be out there that day, right around the corner, or would it be a few days away? But I always knew something new was going to happen, and that's what kept me going. No 2 days were ever the same. And when technology came, oh my goodness, the chances for improvement were always popping up.
What was it like when you started with the BBB technologically?
There was no such thing as technologically, I don't think, when I started 43 years ago. But I have to say, technology changed the world forever. Before, if we needed information from one BBB for a customer, we had to send what we called a speed letter. Now, let me tell you, this letter was not speedy. And then we had to wait for the reply from that BBB to come in the mail before we could help that customer. Sometimes it could take as much as 2 to 3 weeks. We had to use a machine to make metal plates just to address the mail going out to our members.
Right.
And then we had fax machines when they were finally invented. They weren't invented when I first started.
Right.
And we thought we had died and gone to heaven, Drew. We could send the speed letters electronically over the phone lines. Oh my goodness, this was amazing. And when I started, we didn't even have copiers. I mean, that's like a staple today. We use what they call the mimeograph. I don't know if everyone on the call knows what that is, but it's a machine that you had to crank and it would reproduce. And then we had to send things out to a printer if we didn't like the quality of the mimeograph. So nothing was easy. Everything took a lot of time.
Over these 43 years, there has been an evolution of BBB products and services. The BBB of Connecticut created a unique consumer guide years ago. What impact did this have on the BBB and the community?
Oh, yes. I remember that consumer guide. It was a lot of work.
It sure was.
The BBB created a 40 to 50 page soft cover book that the intention was to give consumers tips on how to shop wisely, a list of members of the BBB, and it featured ads from businesses about their services. The impact on the community was mixed, as delivery to the end user was not always timely, and by far, it was not perfect.
When did you hear about this thing called the internet, and how did the BBB tap into its potential?
Oh, Drew, I got a funny story for you. It was in the early 1980s, and I was at a conference with some of the other presidents of the Better Business Bureau throughout the country. And the VP of the Council of Better Business Bureaus said to me and a group of my colleagues that we were going to be able to send and receive messages on a computer using a thing called the internet. Wow, that sounded so much like science fiction. Well, a few years later, through a grant, each BBB received their first computer, and it all began to unfold.
So how did that flesh out? For example, I understand there were BBB reports, BBB online, and then eventually ratings came on and handling complaints changed. And of course, this summit is a manifestation of that internet technology.
Yes, it is. So as far as a BBB report, that's when somebody wants to get a report on a company. There was no more getting up for the staff and going to the file each time you needed to read a report. I mean, it was right there in front of you on the computer. So that was one great thing about technology. It saved a lot of time, and people got their reports a lot quicker, a lot less waiting on the phone, and it might have been a long distance phone call. So that was great. BBB Online was right at the beginning of the internet. It was a new program, and it was born to allow businesses to take advantage of the internet without having access to the internet yet. A separate organization and a separate board of directors made up of marketing professionals from major organizations like Kraft Food, Ford Motor Company, and Sony all helped to design and manage the program. And I was fortunate enough to be one of two CEOs in the Better Business Bureau system that was asked to serve on the board with these marketing gurus and help with this pace of the internet. Well, we were quickly outpaced, and the need for this service no longer existed after some time. And the internet began to evolve, and we were much better able to work with it in our own local BBBs. So BBB Online had its day, and it was a great program, but that day is far gone.
It's interesting. One of the things that happened with the internet is consumers being able to express their opinions about companies. And it almost became the wild, wild west, because anybody can say anything about anybody on the internet. And so the BBB saw an opportunity to implement ratings, A, B, C, D, F, just like in school. And how was the rollout of those ratings, and what made the BBB unique in terms of being able to provide ratings?
Well, this was a very interesting time, because when this happened, BBB CEOs weren't sure they liked this idea. We used to say a company was satisfactory or it was unsatisfactory. So now we were going to say something a little different. We were going to say they had an A+, an A, a B+, a C, a D, even an F. And with these reports available online, it was the consumers who wanted more. They wanted to know how a company was rated, because what they used to say when we said they're satisfactory, well, what does that mean? That meant nothing to them.
Correct.
So I was asked again to chair the international committee to make this happen. And it took over 2 years. I do have to say it was a lot of fun trying different models and getting it to work, but it eventually came out. We eventually convinced every Better Business Bureau in the United States and Canada that this was the way to go. And I had to do a lot of speaking engagements around the country, but we eventually got it to happen. And it really hasn't changed much since the days it started. So it was a great program. We still have ratings.
What's interesting to me, Paulette, is in the whole world of online opinions, customer feedback, one of the unique advantages of the BBB as a business person is that it's fair. There's a vetting process. And, the mantra, the customer is always right. I tell people that's a lie. That's not true, because there are some very manipulative, unreasonable consumers, and they can abuse businesses. And so what I find is the BBB process of ratings is a much fairer approach to evaluating the ethics and integrity of a business than other platforms.
Oh, glad to hear that. You got to write that down so I can tell businesses that don't know that.
Right. Another thing that has come on strong, especially the past few years, is something that Jackie alluded to at the beginning, the scam tracker. I understand many scams are now online, and the scams really are for youth to seniors, the whole demographic spectrum from young to old. You might expect younger people who are more tech savvy to be more astute about avoiding online scams, but that's not necessarily so, is it?
No, it's not necessarily so. And Scam Tracker was set up as a great way for media, for consumers and businesses to see if something is a scam, because it's not always black and white.
No,
So,
they're able to disguise what they do quite well.
Exactly. And so we have to be sure, even when we look at it, is it a scam or is this just a complaint that a company, maybe a rogue employee had done something? Maybe it wasn't really a scam. So when we take a look at this, we also have a heat map that shows where a scam might be hitting. So if it is a scam and it's happening throughout the country, this little heat map that you can look at when you go to Scam Tracker will tell you exactly where this is happening.
How would someone find the scam tracker on our website?
There's a little icon that they have to click.
Okay, and that's all it is.
Yeah.
And then you can tap into those resources. Many organizations enhance their growth through mergers and acquisitions. Decades ago, Connecticut had 3 separate BBBs, each with their own offices, staffs, and accredited businesses. Today, there is one strategically based in Cromwell. Can you describe how 3 BBBs became one?
Well, like any merger, the mergers in Connecticut were born out of the need to service our community. For instance, businesses operated in various parts of the state, and they had to deal with 3 BBBs, sometimes taking out 3 membership dues fees and getting billed all of this, and then trying to figure out where the complaint came from. And so it made all of that much easier and much more efficient for the business. And on the side of the consumers, now they had one place in the state to find information without making some unnecessary long distance calls, only to be told they had the wrong BBB. So it was all about the need of efficiency and helping the consumers and the businesses in a much more efficient manner. So that's how it all came about.
Right. And originally I served on the board of the BBB in Hartford, which was based in Rocky Hill. And then there was a BBB in Fairfield County. What was it like going through that merger and acquisition process? Because some of the business leaders who are participating in today's summit may be right in the middle of something like that, or maybe entertaining that thought. What was that journey really like?
Well, it's interesting. It was a two-part journey for us. We merged first with the Hartford BBB, and it was a matter of the two boards of directors getting together and making a decision on lots of things, including where will they put the office, who would the staff be, and who would be the president. There was a president in each organization between Hartford and New Haven. So we put out a business plan. The two presidents put together a business plan, and the committee that was doing the mergers made the decision who would be the president, where would the BBB be, and then how would the staff be commingled, what parts of the staff would they keep. And mostly, I think they took the people with the best skills. So it worked out quite fine. In our case, we moved the offices to Wallingford at that time. And then we had a really nice, beautiful office in Wallingford with a nice size conference room. And we began to talk to the BBB in Fairfield. And the BBB in Fairfield had a pretty rundown office, and there was no decision. That BBB just wanted to merge with the board of directors of that BBB just wanted to merge into the BBB. I know we had some long convoluted name at the time because we couldn't be called Connecticut yet, but I think we were Southeast Connecticut. And then when we merged together, we became the BBB of Connecticut.
So today, how many people are employed by the BBB of Connecticut?
Well, this has changed a lot in the last year. With pre-pandemic, we were up to 34 employees.
Okay.
By the summer of 2020, we were down to only 24.
Right.
But now we continue to grow back, and we've reached 32 this week. So we're quite happy with that.
Good. And how many accredited businesses are there across the state?
Well, right now we have over 5,400 ABs throughout the state. Let me just mention something now that we're calling them ABs. I was calling them members in the beginning of this. There was a time when we stopped, was somewhere a little after ratings, when we stopped saying we had members. We started to have an accreditation process. So you had to meet our standards to become accredited. So we now call our members accredited businesses. So we have 5,400 of those. We did lose some during the pandemic, but we have regained our numbers since the summer of 2020. It was a challenge, but through creative programming and partnerships, we were able to grow back our numbers within a year's time. And they didn't really drop too far either. And I think that's due a lot to communication.
And Paulette, isn't it true that the BBB does not receive funding from any government entities? Sometimes people think that the BBB is part of the Department of Consumer Protection, or somehow we get grants from the state or the federal government, but that's not true, is it?
No, it's not. We do. It's the dues of the accredited businesses that make up the base of our money. We do have some partnership programs that bring in some money. Our foundation can go out for grants, but basically the BBB itself is all funded by the dollars of the good, trusted businesses that are able to be accredited.
So we want to give a shout out right now to the ABs who are participating in the summit right now. Thank you, folks, for supporting the BBB. That's how we put the lights on and keep the people employed and do what we do. Many businesses struggle with the decision to rent or buy space. I know I've run a business for almost 34 years, and I've chosen to rent all those years. It's not a slam dunk either way. You have to make that call yourself. For decades, the BBB rented office space, as you mentioned, in Wallingford. And then a few years ago, the BBB decided to buy its own facility. Why did the board decide to invest in property?
You know, Drew, that few years ago was giving our age away. That was in 2016. But the BBB needed to be centrally located and to reach all of our community members through that being more central. And that's everything from consumers to businesses, from media to government. So we needed a place that was more accessible, and actually more accessible to staff. Um, at the time in Wallingford, we were a little bit off the beaten path, not quite on a whole series of highways as we are now. So this was the best choice. It gave the organization stability. And while rents were increasing, a mortgage can hold steady. So we have been very fortunate to have had this opportunity. We have an amazing building, and it's in a great location.
You know, I've been to the building many times, of course, for various meetings and events. Are you back open physically?
Well, yes, we are. We are. You can't just walk into the building. We have a vestibule. So you walk in the first set of doors and there is a buzzer. And it's by appointment only at this point in time due to COVID. So if you do come up to the door, we can ask you through that set of doors what you're there for, if you're vaccinated, but nobody really just comes up to the door. So most people have an appointment.
Right.
Any of our vendors would have an appointment. So that works out very easy. But once you come into the building, once we brought you in, you either have to be wearing a mask or we have them provided. And we do have a log because we want to keep track if anything happens. So if there should be an outbreak of COVID or anything, we would have a log of who was in on that particular day. So we
Sure.
do still follow protocols, but yes, people can come.
So if someone participating in the summit wanted to come and actually meet with some of the staff members and actually get a tour of the facility with an advance appointment, he or she could do that.
Yes, they would need an appointment.
Right.
And it would have to be scheduled. Exactly.
So what was that property acquisition process like? Did you hit a lot of curveballs or was it relatively smooth? Because some of our people on this summit call may be, again, you know, evaluating, do I rent, do I buy? How do I figure out the best way for me?
Well, one of the things we did, which you can kind of do with the BBB because you do have a board of directors, we formed a building purchase committee. And it was made up of members of the board that knew what we were trying to accomplish. And that committee was a great help in finding the perfect location. We had a couple of great ideas, but to tell you the truth, the one we picked definitely was the best. And even in the negotiations of the payout of the lease that you're in when you
Right.
change locations has to be done, and it needs to be done as a negotiation. You don't just say, oh, well, I owe them X amount of dollars for the rent over this amount of months. You can negotiate that out.
Right. In light of the pandemic and more people working from home, what do you see in the future concerning owning commercial property?
Well, if you want to know what keeps me up at night, this is a good one, Drew.
Yeah, it is. Yep.
This can be a concern for many, and just like it is for the BBB. As I see it, it's yet another challenge, and we need to evolve to resolve this situation over the next couple of years. We have found that many workers, at least for the BBB, can do their work from home, and the usage needs for our building will probably need to change as the years move along. I'm already thinking of ways it could change, but that's the thing you need to do. You need to keep thinking, what could I do? Doesn't mean you have to do it today, but be ready to do it when the time comes.
Right. The coronavirus has turned the HR world upside down. First, it caused a huge increase in unemployment and working remotely at home. Then it caused people to drop out of the workplace altogether, like that seminar that we were going to have this afternoon that has to be postponed. It created issues pertaining to vaccination and the gradual return to brick and mortar workplaces. How did the BBB navigate through all of the coronavirus craziness?
Well, I would say we followed protocols and directives from the CDC and the state. That kept us safe. Knock on wood, we hadn't had one outbreak of COVID within our office or staff. So that was one good thing by following these protocols. Fortunately, for us at the BBB, we had already begun to work on our infrastructure to offer work from home opportunities. And our thoughts were going to be on bad weather days, especially the
Right.
winters, big snowstorms. We were always giving people a day off. Was that the only thing we could do? Or was there a way people could work from home? And also bad health days, as your staff grows older, sometimes there's a day they need to take a medical day, and that time coming to the office and going back and going to the medical appointment eats up the whole day. So we had already begun the infrastructure. We were able to send everybody home by the second week in March 2020. And what we
Wow.
thought would be a few months, as most of you, wasn't. So as technology improved and time wore on, we began to find work-life balance for our employees was evolving. Zoom and Teams make communication extremely easy.
Well, I'm curious, with people working at home more and more, how have you addressed the possible concerns that they're really not working? You don't see them at the office working. You're trusting them to be doing what they're supposed to be doing at home. How do you keep productivity high when people aren't working together in an office environment?
Well, I think you said the key word there, Drew. It's trust. We had to have trust in our employees that they could get the job done. And just like we have to have trust in the business community. So with that, we were able to work with the individuals and work on a way that we could hold them accountable. But then we always did that in the office too. So it wasn't entirely new. There's a lot of accountability that comes through reports that come through the BBB. There's a lot of work that's done already within our computers. But that's, if I was to talk to somebody else who didn't have the kind of infrastructure we have, I would say accountability. Begin to get your staff accountable and somehow be able to read those reports or whatever, however you set it up, so that you have some understanding of what they're doing on a daily basis. And that will really help you. One of the newest things we discovered, for those that don't always work in our software, we have also, we've gone to 365 since this has all happened. And our Teams program, and it runs out task reports. So the task reports can also be shared with the managers. So it really has helped, Drew.
So right now, looking at your staffing and looking back on the past 2 years, how you've adapted and evolved in this coronavirus environment, I understand you have made some transitions in staffing that may be longer term. We'll find out in the months ahead. But for example, where is your sales force now? And how do you have a hybrid staff? Are they part working in the office, part at home? What does that look like?
Well, we do have a hybrid situation. We do have staff coming into the office every day. It's not necessarily the same people every day. We have everyone is responsible to come in 3 to 5 days a week. Most have, for work-life balance, have chosen the 3 days a week, but they can only do that if they're vaccinated. If they're not vaccinated, they are currently allowed to work from home. We only have 5 of those, so it's not a large number. And we will reevaluate that situation in mid-January. Then we have members. These are the unique ones, and they're members of the accreditation team. They don't even live in Connecticut. They come in from out of state. So I would say we have staff that works in our accreditation department from Massachusetts, Texas, New Hampshire, Iowa, Virginia, Florida. I mean, they're from all over. And I'd also like to talk about board of directors. Now there's 32 of those.
Right.
And they've also been operating by Zoom on Zoom calls when they had to have a board meeting during all of this. They have not come back to the office yet, but we're planning to set up some kind of a hybrid situation in 2022 where maybe some come in and some will remote in. So we've got to make sure that technology is all in place. Although there is technology in the conference room, it might need a little bit more tweaking.
So it seems like flexibility between online presence and physical presence has become a new reality for all of us. Personally, I don't really miss the early morning drives to those board meetings from my house in Ellington. And I serve on the foundation board now, and it's all by Zoom. And even though there are limitations to Zoom, because you don't have the kind of relationship building between, before the meeting and after the meeting that you would have if you were there in person, it sure is convenient.
It is. And I do find a lot of times board members aren't saying as much as they used to say when they were sitting in the conference room. That could be a good thing, but it could also be a bad thing because they might have had some great idea and it never got said.
Sure. And when you were talking about your accreditation team, what you're really talking about for most business leaders is your sales team, correct?
Yes.
So your sales team has really expanded geographically, where most of your salespeople pre-COVID were here in Connecticut, and now most of your salespeople are not in Connecticut. Right.
And that's because we can do it remotely. And one, and two, we could not find anybody in Connecticut who wanted a sales job.
Okay.
That's the hardest. We have found that to be the hardest job to fill during this whole time. So the pandemic has made it very difficult to find good sales help.
So maybe that's a takeaway for somebody participating in this session is maybe you've been struggling rebuilding your sales team, but your thinking has been you need people here in Connecticut, and maybe you need to think out of the box, and maybe there's a way for you to find salespeople out of state who can still provide that level of quality and professionalism and help you to sell your products and services. Anyone who studies history or studies economics understands that there are economic cycles. The economic pendulum tends to swing back and forth from growth to recession. The BBB of Connecticut has weathered several recessions with you at the helm, and here you are still standing after 43 years. I remember my first recession as a business owner in the late 80s, early 90s, and it was scary. But you learn things through the school of hard knocks, and you say, okay, next time this happens, and there will be a next time, we'll handle it differently. So what was your first experience with a recession as a leader of the BBB?
Well, as a young leader in the 1970s, we were faced with the rising oil price recession.
Yes.
That caused rising prices and rising unemployment. BBB had no real plan and had very limited funds at that time. And at that time, there were still 3 BBBs in the state. So each BBB was very small.
Right.
So the only thing we really did was to wait it out and with some cutbacks. But we found that we had a lot of ground to make up after it ended.
So how did that translate the next time?
So I guess especially during the Great Recession in the late 200s, after all those learning curves from the other recessions, we learned to better use communication techniques. And of course, there was a lot better communication techniques by this point. We had to do lots of marketing and stay out front. So our marketing included social media, a very useful tool. We got the word out all the time on social media. Of course, staff is home. The marketing staff is home, working on some great social media outreaches and letting everyone know what's happening. We also did a whole series of communication webinars that helped people through the pandemic, that helped businesses that didn't know where to turn. we put up billboards. We stayed out front with billboards. And we still do that. And I recommend that to anyone. You wouldn't think a billboard did as much as it does, but it is definitely brand awareness. And when you're in a pandemic or a recession, you need to keep yourself out front. And that billboard, people are driving by it, they're going to see that you're still there. And public facing news. We had some great newsworthy stories during this pandemic, but during the Great Recession, we still did that in the early 2000s. We were definitely out there with all of those things. And the thing is just not to hide.
You know, it's interesting, in the mid to late 70s, sometimes we get these mantras that sweep into our culture. And there was one that says, leverage your assets. And in the mid to late 80s, it seemed like many business leaders got into trouble because they took on that mantra and took on way too much debt. And when the recession came, they were they had such an enormous weight of debt that they couldn't persevere through the storm. And so isn't one of the principles that you can apply so you can prepare for the next recession is be very, very careful about the debt that you take on. Even if business is booming, you have to be extremely careful, because the pendulum will shift and you're going to be strapped with all that debt, and it's not going to be helpful.
And you're right, Drew, that pendulum is always shifting. I mean, if I took my 43 years, I would say you can expect it. I mean, sometimes it's only 4 or 5 years, but you can expect it at least every 10 years. There's going to be some type of recession, whether it's a great recession or it's a smaller recession, there's going to be something. So you're right. You don't want to have a whole bunch of debt when that happens.
It's sort of like us in New England here, whether you like it or not, winter's coming.
Right.
And we all wish that summer would be longer, but as long as you choose to live here, that's not going to happen. So summer turns into fall and fall turns into winter. And so you can either curse winter or you can prepare for it and enjoy it and get through it. And that's sort of like with the economic pendulum. You know, it's not going to be economic summer all the time. You have to be prepared for an economic winter. Another thing that I've learned is, you know, in the good times, squirrel away some money as a rainy day fund.
Mm-hmm.
And don't just spend everything you earn and then you find yourself with zero savings when the winter comes.
You know, Drew, that's a good point, because the BBB does have an investment plan. It's a small, moderate portfolio.
Right.
But if we didn't do that, how would we get through if something happened? And you know, we need to be here for the consumers. So although we're able to put some away, I mean, we still put lots of money into programming, but we have to be in making sure it's there for the businesses today. But if you're not putting something away, then you're not taking good care of your organization.
Right. I mean, for you to wake up every day, let's look at the pandemic, the past year and a half, you had a responsibility with payroll for 30 plus people. Right. And, you know, the fact that you had some savings as a cushion, you know, helped to minimize the stress level for you as a leader, rather than wondering every payroll period whether you're going to have enough in the bank to meet payroll. It can be an extremely scary thing. Another thing that I agree with you on is stay visible. Oftentimes business leaders, when things turn south, their visceral knee-jerk reaction is to cut the marketing budget.
Mm-hmm.
And that's oftentimes one of the worst things you can do. Because I live in a farm town in Ellington, and I've told people for years, the seeds of recovery are planted during the recession. So if you're not staying visible and you're not getting those seeds and you're not watering those seeds, when the economy rebounds, you're not going to enjoy the harvest. Because like you said, the first time you went through a recession, you didn't have any assets to stay visible, and it took you a long time to rebound. And part of the reason why it takes you a long time to rebound is because you didn't stay visible during the recession.
Exactly.
Let's see here. In a way, the BBB is a bit recession proof, as you alluded to. because through good times and bad, consumers always need to be protected, educated, and helped. Isn't that why the BBB of Connecticut formed a foundation a few years ago?
Yes, Drew, this is true. We formed the BBB Foundation in 2016 to help educate our community and to offer scholarships to young entrepreneurs as they enter college.
Interesting. What do you see in the future for the BBB Foundation? It's still in its infancy. I serve on its board, and we're still sort of in the incubator, developing this foundation. But what's your vision for years down the road? Where would you like it to go?
Well, I believe the foundation's just getting started. So one of the first things we started was an amazing military line program.
Right.
And we're servicing veterans and in-service military throughout the state in a lot of great ways. We attend different events. We're constantly handing out materials on how they can invest wisely. These young military people have no idea about investing their money. And just like we were talking about saving for the future, it's like a hand to mouth to them. So we try to help them understand why it's important. And then the veterans, we help them find ways to get back on their feet after they've gotten out of the service. So that program was basically what the foundation has been working on. But now we're looking at developing both youth and senior programs.
Right.
Maybe getting out into some of those schools, have programs that they can use to understand why it's important to have good credit, why it's important to invest wisely, and to make wise shopping decisions.
Right.
So these are all those good things. And then for seniors, we all know there's so many scams. So we can always be talking about scams with seniors. So I see a lot of that developing. But one of the big things is that in 2022, we plan to hire a full-time director for the foundation, because we're finally at the point where we're going to be able to do that, who will be actively creating funding sources for the future and assisting with new program development. So that's all to come. So it's exciting times. So
it's really a platform for consumer education.
Yes. Yes. A foundation, you have to name a foundation when you're putting your charter together. It has to do certain things. And one of the things it's allowed to do is education or to give the scholarship money. So that's the two things that we fit into.
Right. And, I look at the landscape of our culture today, and the financial illiteracy is very sobering. Young people are not being taught things about money and what to do with your money, what not to do with your money, how to make wise shopping choices, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a huge need for this. And also in terms of integrity and ethics, I think that message has to go out in terms of superior customer service and helping people to understand that it pays to be a person of integrity and be a trustworthy person, individually and also as a business leader and as a corporation or as a company, as an organization. That, your reputation, Paulette, I'm sure you've seen over these decades, people who seemingly don't care about their reputation as a company, for example, and it catches up to them. Eventually, it hurts a lot of people. Think of Enron as an extreme example. They looked like they were such a great corporation, and then it all fell apart like just in a whirl. And so have you seen over these decades the value of being a business leader, just holding on to integrity and trying to treat people right, and how as the time goes by, it pays dividends?
Oh, most definitely. And, Drew, another point at which businesses have and gotten themselves into trouble is they build a business model and it maybe not quite the best ethical business model. And when explained that, they still don't change it.
Right.
And, you try to get them to understand why it's important, how that's not the best way to handle customers. I'll give you an example. A company I've talked to 100,000 times, it feels like, but they have a a belief that when the contract, so you have an agreement with them, then it has to renew every year, a service agreement.
Right,
And they say that the service agreement, if you do nothing, it will renew.
right,
And you have 30 days to renew
right,
it. That's all how their business model is based
right,
on, that people will not remember to renew it during those
right,
30 days.
right.
Yes, the government has now said you have to say it in this large point, and you have to let everybody know. But there's still ways that if this is your model, that they get around it, and then the contract renews. And maybe when it renews, it's not in your best interest, and you can't get out of the contract. Why
Right,
is that your business model? People are
right,
talking about you. People are writing about you on the internet.
right,
Why do you keep that your business model? So
right.
that is one of the very tough things that I don't understand. When you see that something's a little off tweak with your business model, maybe it's time to change it.
Paulette, what I think you're saying is rather than going by the letter of the law, go by the spirit of the law. And
Exactly.
treat consumers like people. And if you need to be flexible on these things, it's in your best interest not to play hardball.
Right.
The other reality I think that should be encouraging to people plugging into this session is there's no such thing as a perfect business. There's no such thing as a perfect business leader. There's no such thing as perfect customer service and the perfect customer. We live in an imperfect world. And so don't beat yourself up when you've made mistakes. Just do the best you can to repair the damage and try to make things right and keep moving on. Speaking of culture, Connecticut is a state of 3.6 million people. And the BBB of Connecticut's primary responsibility is those people. That's a big responsibility that you have to wake up to every day.
It is.
Over the past 40 years, Connecticut culture has changed. Do you think consumers are more aware of ethics in business today than years ago?
I think consumers are more aware of the need for ethics in business. And that's because they see so many scams,
Right.
especially online, those phony offers. So they're hungry for someone to help out and make the business playing field even.
The other side of the coin is, do you think businesses are more aware of ethics today than years ago?
The good ones are, and they realize that to be successful in today's market, they must run an honest and an ethical business. Sometimes this may even mean changing the business model, as I said before.
Right. And if you study the demographic patterns in Connecticut, based on the recent census data, Connecticut continues to be a culture that's increasingly diverse. And so you and all of us have to adapt to those changing demographics. How is the BBB evolving in a culture that is becoming increasingly diverse, culturally, ethnically? How are you adapting to that changing environment?
Well, the BBB sees increasing diversity as a challenge. And we also see it has many opportunities. So we are working on both local level within our office. So what can we do right here in Connecticut, here and now? And internationally, our International Association of Better Business Bureau is creating programs to bring BBB services to all members of our community. I guess one way to say this is some of the translations are being done for us so that we don't have that type of difficulty. Okay. And then just some programs of how can we reach out? Sometimes it is hard to hire from a certain demographic. And how do you hire from that demographic? Where do you have to go? How do you find them so that you can have diversity within your office even? All of those things are a challenge. And the best thing is to talk about them with your leadership team, with your managers. How can you reach out and find these people, and how can you better service those in our community?
Right. And really the BBB exists to help all consumers, from the inner city to the country to the suburbs. And so the BBB has to be relevant to all kinds of people groups. And sometimes their perception of the BBB may be different. Maybe they don't know anything about the BBB, and you have a larger educational component to cultivate relationships with certain groups. So a lot of interesting things on the horizon, I'd say.
Well, that's where social media does play a big part, because
Right,
all over the United States and Canada,
right.
people are on the internet, and social media, if we can be out there and keeping our presence known and what they can come and use the BBB for, that's what's most helpful.
Right. And thinking of my experience these past 33, 34 years with the BBB, you have adapted to technology over time. And, there is a learning curve. You can't do everything instantly.
Mhm.
But, hats off to your team there, because I've seen your presence, your digital footprint escalate in recent years, where you have a good presence on the internet. You have a good presence on social media. You're leveraging all these technologies to accomplish your mission. So hats off to you and the team for being able to keep up with that. Sometimes it's exhausting to try to keep up with that.
And
But
Drew, we have programs like that for our accredited businesses. We have programs that will help them increase their footprint. So that's part of what the accreditation does for you. When you say, well, okay, I'm accredited, but what does it do for me? Please give us a call, because there are so many ways we can help you increase your digital footprint and really make it happen for you.
And really, the BBB operates in a concurrent way, in the sense that you're reaching consumers and helping them, but at the same time, you're helping business leaders and business owners to operate better businesses through this summit and other things. So you really have a passion to help to equip business leaders to operate good businesses day in and day out. How many AB locations are there now in Connecticut? I think you said over 5,000.
Yeah, there's over 86,000 businesses in Connecticut that would fall into the category of could they be BBB accredited? Doesn't mean they all could be.
Right.
And then out of that, we have 5,400 right now BBB accredited business. This is 6.4% of our market potential. And we do have growth going on, so that's exciting. And we have to be careful again of I can't even tell you how many businesses don't meet our standards after they've applied, and we have to tell them, no, you don't meet them. So not everybody can just join because they want to join. You have to meet the standards.
Yep. So in other words, the BBB is not a paper tiger. You don't just cut a check and send it to the BBB and all of a sudden you become accredited. There's a vetting process.
There's a vetting process, and it's all about meeting the standards of trust.
Why do you think, after all these years, that over 5,000 businesses in Connecticut continue to support the BBB? Why is it that the BBB of Connecticut is the second largest business organization in the state? What is your retention rate year to year? Do most accredited businesses stay with the BBB long term, like I have? And why is that?
Well, our retention rate over the years, and recessions can do this. I think at the worst part, they'll fall into the low 80s, but right now we're in the low 90s. So it fluctuates there depending on what the economic times show, because it's not because the business doesn't want to. Oftentimes in a recession, a business will say, I just don't have the money. I need to drop my accreditation right now, but I want to come back. So that's always good news that they say that. And what the businesses, why they want to stay is because of that power of trust in the marketplace. They know that when a consumer has confidence in a business, they are more willing to do business with them. And that's what we're all about. the BBB seal is a sign of trust and can only be displayed by a BBB accredited business. So yeah, you want to be able to put that seal up. And sometimes the not so good companies want to be able to put that seal up because they know that consumers trust that seal.
Right.
And that's why we have such stringent vetting process.
Right, because otherwise your integrity can be compromised. If companies without integrity are allowed in, then it waters down the quality and the reputation. And they sort of piggyback on the BBB as to present themselves as one thing when they're really not. And you want to avoid that. You know, I think too, you know, compared to memberships in other organizations like a chamber of commerce or other things, yes, you as a business leader, you'd want to get something out of it. But I think I know I've been accredited now for like 34 years. I don't cut that check every year because I'm expecting to get something out of it. I cut the check because I'm fully engaged in the mission of the BBB. And so I try to put my money where my mouth is. And I think there are a lot of accredited businesses that are motivated by that. It's a good and noble cause.
Well, you know, Drew, that's interesting you say that, because later in this summit, we are going to have a session on what you can get out of your accreditation.
Right.
So you may not be the one looking for that, but there are still a lot of businesses
Yes, there are.
that ROI. So
Yes,
we are going to do a session. So make sure that you know exactly what you can use as benefits.
that's right.